Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. It begins like a whisper you were never meant to hear. A dusty courthouse file, hidden in a locked drawer. A brittle photograph, half faded, of a mother and son standing too close, their eyes revealing something unspeakable. At first, it looks like nothing more than a family portrait, until you look longer, until you see what others refuse to see. The story you are about to hear was whispered about in hushed voices across the Appalachian hills, where poverty and isolation built walls around families, shutting them away from the rest of the world. What grew inside those walls was something America didn't want the world to know. A mother who crossed the forbidden line and married her own son. This isn't fiction. This isn't folklore. This is documented history, quietly buried under court transcripts, medical records, and the recollections of neighbors who swore they would never speak of it again. A story so dark, it makes you question what people are capable of when desperation, loneliness, and broken bloodlines intertwine. America has many forgotten families. Families the government tried to ignore, communities too poor to be helped, places where education and religion failed to keep the shadows away. In those forgotten corners, silence became a shield and shame became a prison. But silence cannot last forever. Whispers leak, secrets rot, and in this particular case, what began as gossip eventually revealed a horrifying truth, one that left even seasoned investigators disturbed. The records describe a mother who never let her son leave her side, who raised him not just as a child, but later as something else entirely, something no society can accept, yet something this family lived with as if it were ordinary. Tonight, you'll hear about America's most inbred mother, a woman who married her own son. You'll hear how it happened, why it happened, and how an entire community chose to look the other way. This is not just a story of forbidden love, it is a story of power, of control, and of what happens when the line between family and desire is erased. The beginning of this story hides in the quiet poverty of rural America, a place where the roads turned to dirt and the houses leaned like they were too tired to stand, where neighbors lived miles apart, and the only thing louder than the silence was the shame that clung to every family secret. It is here, in these forgotten backwoods, that the mother at the center of this story grew up. Her childhood was not one of laughter or innocence, but of survival. She was born into a family already scarred by generations of hardship. Her father was rumored to be cruel, her mother absent in spirit, long before she left in body. She learned early on that love was not something freely given, but something taken, twisted or withheld. In communities like this, blood often mixed too closely, not because of passion, but because of isolation. Families intermarried, cousins became husbands and wives, and the cycle of inbreeding left marks, not only on the faces of the children, but on their minds, their bodies, their very sense of right and wrong. When she was a girl, she saw this cycle all around her. A cousin who gave birth to her own uncle, a neighbor whose children were whispered about, their features too strange to ignore, and while the outside world might recoil in horror, inside this valley such things were not openly condemned. They were spoken of in low voices, then buried beneath the weight of silence. As she grew, something inside her hardened. By the time she became a mother herself, she was already carrying the burden of a childhood stripped of boundaries, stripped of normality. Her son, the boy she would later marry, was the only constant in her life. He was born into poverty, into a world that gave him no choices. From the beginning, she clung to him not only as her child, but as her lifeline. Neighbors would later say she rarely let the boy out of her sight. He dressed him as if he were her doll, spoke of him with a kind of possessiveness that made others uneasy, and yet no one intervened. In these parts of America, minding your own business was not just a courtesy, it was survival. And so the boy grew up, not in the arms of a mother, but in the grip of a woman whose love was already bending towards something unnatural. By the time the boy reached adolescence, the line between mother and son was already blurred. In most households, that stage of life brings distance, a child pulling away, craving independence, testing the boundaries of adulthood. But in their home, there was no pulling away. There was no space to breathe. His world began and ended with her. She did not allow him friendships outside their walls. School was inconsistent, often interrupted by sudden absences or excuses. The few teachers who remembered him recalled a quiet boy, pale and withdrawn, who avoided eye contact and never raised his hand. He was always tired, as if something weighed on him that no child should carry. Inside their home, the relationship grew more suffocating. She was both caretaker and warden, controlling every aspect of his life, and as he aged into his teenage years, her behavior grew harder to disguise. She would hold his hand too long in public, speak of him as if he were her partner rather than her child. Some neighbors noticed, but they told themselves it was harmless. People in small towns often see what they want to see and pretend not to notice what unsettles them. It is in this silence that their relationship crossed into territory so disturbing it still leaves a stain on the records. The woman who had given him life began to claim him in another way, as her husband in all but name. At first, there were only whispers, a strange closeness, a locked door, a voice heard in the night. Then came the undeniable signs. She stopped calling him her son in conversation. Instead, she introduced him as someone else entirely. When authorities eventually uncovered the truth, the documents described their union in clinical terms, a mother and son who entered into a marriage arrangement, not symbolic, not rumored, but real. Court transcripts detail how she insisted he was the only person she could ever love, that they were meant to be. He, raised in her shadow, knew no other world, no other possibility. To him, this was not forbidden. It was simply life as he had always known it. The law calls it incest. The community called it shame. But to them, inside that closed-off house, it was routine, the only bond that mattered, and by the time anyone dared to intervene, the damage was already done. The discovery did not come from brave neighbors or local gossip. It came almost by accident, uncovered during a routine welfare investigation. Officials had been sent to check on the family, as whispers of neglect and poverty often drew the attention of social workers in those days. What they found was not just another struggling household, but a reality that would chill them for years to come. The records speak coldly, but between the lines you can feel the unease. The investigator described the home as unusually close, unusually private. When questions were asked, the woman answered for her son, even though he was already a grown man by then. She insisted he had no need for outside employment, no need for friendships, no need for anyone else but her. And when pressed about their living arrangements, her words slipped into territory no one expected. She referred to him as her partner, not my son, but my husband. The air in that room must have grown heavy as the meaning of her words sank in. Officials documented what they could, but even then, hesitation lingered. To accuse a mother of such a thing was unthinkable. Communities like this often shielded their own, not out of kindness, but out of fear of exposure. If one family's secrets were dragged into daylight, who knew how many others would follow? But secrets cannot stay hidden forever. Medical records soon revealed the depth of their entanglement. The woman was no longer just his mother or his wife. She had given birth to children by her own son, children who carried the genetic scars of inbreeding, children who bore the weight of a forbidden union written into their very DNA. Some lived, some did not. The ones who survived carried visible marks of their lineage, features that made the townspeople stare too long before quickly looking away. The whispers grew louder, but the family remained untouched, protected by a code of silence that ran deeper than the law. For most, this was a story too grotesque to confront. Easier to pretend it didn't exist, easier to say nothing, easier to turn the page. But the records remain, yellowed with time, reminding us that what happened was real, and that entire generations were shaped by the choices of one mother who crossed the line no one should ever cross. By now, the story had slipped into the hands of local authorities. Yet even as the truth surfaced, there was hesitation in how far they would go. Rural courts in mid-century America were not built to handle cases like this, not only because of the law, but because of shame. To put such a case on trial meant exposing not just one family, but the entire community that had enabled them through silence. The proceedings were kept quiet, as though the less people knew, the safer the town would be. Newspaper clippings from the era reveal only vague references: indecency, moral corruption, family scandal. The words were stripped of detail, hiding the true horror underneath. But between those lines, the reality remains. A mother legally married her own son, and children were born from that union. The court documents describe the son as withdrawn, passive, almost childlike in his answers. He did not speak as a husband, he did not speak as a son. He spoke as someone conditioned, molded from birth to obey a single voice, his mother's. Some psychologists who later studied the case described it as learned submission. He had no framework for a normal life. He could not imagine a world where she was not both his mother and his wife. Neighbors who testified did so reluctantly. One admitted he had seen them together in ways that disturbed him, but he never reported it. Another recalled hearing the children call their grandmother Mama and their father Brother. But fear of humiliation kept them from acting sooner. In towns like this, silence was as binding as law. And that silence leaves us with a chilling question. How many others knew? How many others looked the other way because acknowledging the truth would mean confronting something too monstrous to bear? If you're still watching, you're already braver than most. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done? If this was your bloodline, would you speak out? Or would you stay silent like the neighbors who watched this unfold? The trial ended quietly. Records show minimal punishment, more of a formality than true justice. The family was left fractured but not broken, allowed to fade back into obscurity, but the damage had already been done, and the scars of their choices would linger through the next generation. The children born from that union carried the weight of decisions they never asked for. They grew up marked, not just by their physical features, but by the whispers that followed them everywhere. In school, if they even attended, other children stared. Some mocked. Others simply avoided them, unsettled by what they represented. Isolation became their inheritance. The house on the hill, or the shack by the woods, wherever they lived, it became a place people crossed the road to avoid. Visitors described the children as quiet, withdrawn, and different. One neighbor recalled seeing a girl who seemed lost in her own world, rocking back and forth, whispering to herself. Another spoke of a boy with twisted limbs who rarely left the house. These were the legacies of inbreeding, written in bone and blood. Yet behind those closed doors, the cycle continued. The mother, now both matriarch and pariah, still held control. Her son, broken down into little more than obedience, remained by her side. For him there was no escape, no chance to build another life. Every time he looked at her, he saw not just his mother, but the woman who told him he was chosen, destined, bound to her in ways he could never undo. What is perhaps most unsettling is how ordinary it all appeared from a distance. The family went about their days. They grew crops, mended fences, occasionally came into town for supplies. To the untrained eye, they might have seemed like any other poor rural household. But the truth sat just beneath the surface, rotting quietly, infecting every generation it touched. The authorities knew, the neighbors knew, and yet the family was left to live out their lives mostly undisturbed. America, in its quiet cruelty, often prefers to bury its shame rather than confront it. And so, the story of a mother who married her son was never taught in classrooms, never spoken of in sermons, never given the attention it deserved. Instead, it became one of those stories you only hear if you dig deep enough, or if you stumble upon the wrong set of records in a courthouse archive. The question lingers: were they truly alone in this, or just the most visible example of something happening in silence across other forgotten valleys of America? Next section. Time has a way of burying what people cannot face. The names of the mother and son have faded from memory, their descendants scattered or lost. The house where it all happened is likely gone now, collapsed into the soil, reclaimed by the woods. But the story remains, lingering like a ghost in the corners of American history. When we look back, it is easy to recoil, to label this family as monsters, to believe they were an isolated case. But history tells us something more unsettling. This was not a single aberration. It was part of a wider, darker pattern. Isolation, poverty, and silence created the conditions for these acts, and the refusal of neighbors, churches, and governments to confront them allowed the cycle to continue. The mother who married her own son was not just an individual crossing a forbidden line. She was a symbol of what happens when entire communities choose to look away. Her story forces us to ask uncomfortable questions about morality, control, and the fragility of human boundaries. What do people become when shame is stronger than truth? When silence is easier than justice? Some believe the family's bloodline ended there. Others whisper that descendants still live quietly in forgotten corners of America, their origins never spoken aloud. Perhaps you've even passed one of them on the street, never knowing the weight of the history they carry in their veins. But one thing is certain, this is not a story meant to entertain. It is a warning, a reminder of how quickly love can twist into control, how easily devotion can turn into imprisonment, and how silence can become the most dangerous accomplice of all. So as we close this chapter, ask yourself, what would you have done if this story belonged to your town? Would you have turned away just as the neighbors did, or would you have been the one voice to drag the truth into the light? Because, somewhere, even now, there are families hiding secrets just as dark. Secrets that will only come to light when someone is brave enough to look too closely, to ask the questions no one wants answered. Thank you for watching. If you found this story important, share it, and remember, history does not stay buried forever.